ladies, it is a pleasure to be here today to tell you about how I became famous. Famous for writing a letter of all things. My name is Phoebe Ensminger Burn, but wouldn't you know it? People have a propensity for shortening names, no matter how short your name already is. My name of Phoebe I never thought was long enough for anyone to want to shorten it, but sure enough, even when I was a young girl through my school years and on into today, they shortened it to Miss Phoebe. But that's just people, isn't it? In my hometown in Tennessee, I was never famous for very much or well known for very much. I was a member of the DAR, and I could give a nice tea and cook little petits-fours, or prepare, I should say, little petits-fours in a nice fashion. I also was known in my garden club for raising beautiful philodendron. You see, I often used to talk to my philodendron, and I believe that that is the credit for its growth. But I never was nationally famous. Oh goodness, no. Anonymity was always my watchword. But then we got into the year 1920, our year, this year, and we began to move forward in the summer. And all the talk in Tennessee and my hometown in the country, the whole nation was focused on the 19th Amendment. You see, the suffragettes and the suffragists and those that were for women getting the vote, they needed over 36 states in their state convention to ratify and say they were for women getting the right to vote. Well, I don't understand to this day the issue. Many men were dead set against giving women the right to vote. They would say terrible things like, if we give them the right to vote, it's all over. My goodness gracious. Weren't those men's mothers? Weren't their mothers women? Weren't their beloved wives women? Weren't their girlfriends women? Weren't their beautiful daughters and sisters women? Well, there you have it. What were they afraid of, for goodness sake? Well, it all got down to Tennessee. Tennessee could cast that deciding vote in their convention for suffrage. Well, of course, I was for it. My sonny boy, my good boy, Harry Burn, became 2 years ago the youngest House of Representatives ever elected. I was so proud to have Harry as a young representative in the state legislature. I made sure that I never tried to influence him because, you see, it's a human propensity, a human tendency for everyone to want to be accepted. So, of course, Harry, as a young man in that House legislative body of the House of Representatives in Tennessee, well, he wanted to be accepted by the older men. He wanted to be liked, and my goodness gracious, so many of the men were just bitterly opposed to giving women the right to vote. That was all we were talking about in August of 1920. Well, you see, it got down to this. I had never ever tried to influence my sonny boy on how to vote. Oh heavens, no, that was his job now, but, well, this was just too important an issue. It had gone on for years and years and years. Well, we all know about Susan B. Anthony being drugged across the street and given more black eyes than she could even note, And then there was Mrs. Cat, of course, who wanted desperately to put the rat into ratification and to give us the right to vote. So I wrote a letter. I wrote the letter on August 16th. Many radio programs want to interview me now, and they call it a little note. This is one copy. I went through several copies and edits. I didn't want to be too heavy-handed. After all, it was his job as representative to cast his vote. You see, the House of Representatives had already voted twice. Oh yes, twice. And it was tied twice. 48 to 48. Now, I don't know if they had considered that it was 3 strikes and you're out. I don't know why, but they did agree to vote one more time on August 18th, 1920. So before that was going to happen, I decided I was going to write my sonny boy, my Harry T. Burn, and I was going to tell him, your mama, good DAR lady member and garden club member for my philodendron, I would like for you to please look in your heart and consider. So I wrote him the letter. I talked about how I wished he would come home, and it had been raining and it was wonderful, and I rambled on that 6-page letter that some call just a note. And finally I got to the essence of the reason why I had written. Hooray for suffrage and vote for suffrage. Harry, be a good sonny boy. I have been listening to the radio and watching, and as of yet I have not heard how you feel on this subject. Oh, I know there are harsh feelings on both sides, and that you are pulled both ways. But Harry, please help Mrs. Cat put the rat in ratification. Vote for suffrage, Harry. Your mother loves you. Signed, Phoebe, your mother. And he did. He did. I was listening on the radio. It must have been a virtual circus lady. Try to picture in your mind's eye the opening ceremonies for the House of Representatives that day. This would be the last time Tennessee would vote. It was tied, had been tied in the previous 2 votes, 48 to 48. They were going through the call of all the representatives. The suffragettes and the suffragists in the balconies were wearing yellow roses. All of the representatives who were against, that was the men that were against giving women the right to vote, were wearing red roses. When it got to Harry T. Burn, he said it so quickly, I couldn't quite discern it. He said. And later he told me that he took that red rose off his lapel. But what I didn't know was that he immediately went upstairs and excused himself. So great was the fervor in those chambers of the House of Representatives. He really did fear for his safety. And he stayed upstairs until the building had been vacated, but I didn't know this. I didn't hear from him for a while, but all was well. Of course, some of the men were violently angry with him, but he is well. And I was famous. Why, all the radio stations are calling Miss Phoebe and asking me to recant the story I have just shared with you. But you know what, ladies and gentlemen, it was time. It was simply time. As I have chronicled to you, women are the mothers of our society, of all the generations of men and women. We cannot deny that. To your mother you owe everything, your life and your wife and all the other categories. And so Tennessee went into the chronicles of history as becoming the last state needed for our America to change the Constitution and say not only that men are given the right to vote, but that men and women are given the right to vote. And so I thank you today for listening to my one day of fame, August 18th, 1920. Get out there and vote. Oh!